Our business is also located here. We do business all over the world in infrastructure, but I think it's really important that we call Mississauga our home too. So I'm really delighted to be the MC for today. I just want to remind everybody before we start that we are on the hallowed grounds of the Mississauga, the new credit, and I want to acknowledge that. But really, before we begin, I want to acknowledge the presence of some other people who are also hallowed. I'm excited to introduce the fact that the real mayor of the city of Mississauga, the Mayor Emeritus, Hazel McCallion, is here. Your Worship, good to see you. There's another gentleman who's equally, who's got a very interesting political background. He was a former former federal member of Parliament for Mississauga Streetsville. Brad Budd is here. Brad, welcome to. Before I introduce our mayor to say a few words, my mayor I should say, to say a few words, I just want to introduce you to the Pearson Center. It's a very interesting organization, and by virtue of the number of people that are here, I think that this organization has done an effective job of being on the conscience of a lot of issues in the public. But more importantly, its CEO, Andrew Cardoso, has done a very effective job across the country of making sure that relevant issues of the day are talked about. The organization was formed in 2013. I'm very fortunate to play a role as an advisor to the Pearson Center, very happily so. In our organization, chaired by the Right Honourable John Ann Turner, whom many of you in this audience would know too, is very much an advisor to this organization and loves it, and Andrew couldn't be here today, unfortunately. This is a progressive think tank. It's, as you all know, it addresses economic issues and social policy, but we do a lot of events across Canada. I urge all of you to follow this organization. I think we do a very terrific job of making sure that we have social media at the forefront of what we do, but if you get a chance to look at thepearsoncenter.ca or even follow it on Facebook or Twitter, that would be wonderful. Today's sponsors, whom I wish to thank, are headlined today, the Greater Toronto Airports Authority, and I'm going to call upon Hillary in a moment, and the Cement Association of Canada, who are also here, some great friends. Our platinum sponsor, however, is SNC Lavalin, and you can see SNC Lavalin signs all over the place, and we're really grateful for their support for this event as well. Before I call on you, Hillary, I want to, two things I want to do. Number one, we always do draws at the Pearson Center. We're very open about that. And we actually look to you as audience members to put your cards here. And this good-looking guy here has got this ball, and if anybody hasn't put their card in, I urge you to do that, because we have these as gifts. Bob Ray, I don't know if anybody knows who Bob Ray is, but Bob Ray wrote a book, and this book is up for grabs for today, as well as this beautiful book by Nita Ra-Ben-Deng, which I urge everybody to read as well, Tell It to the Trees. It's a spectacular book, and both of these are door prizes for today, so if you haven't put your card in, please do that. It's now my honor as a citizen of this city to introduce my mayor. I love my mayor. I've known my mayor for a long, long time. She's a neighbor, but she's a great friend, Bonnie Crombie.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Welcome to Mississauga. We are, of course, Ontario's 3rd largest city and Canada's 6th largest city. I want to thank the team from the Pearson Center for organizing this panel discussion, and I too like to recognize a few folks now that you've already recognized the Chancellor, former Mayor, the CEO, Chief Elder Officer for Rivera, Hazel McCallion. I won't do so, but Hazel's here, and we welcome you. Thank you for joining us, as always. I have a couple of councillors in the room. I'd like to introduce Councillor John Kovac, Ward 4. This is his home turf. Councillor, thank you for joining us. Councillor Chris Fonseca is here with us from Ward 3. Say hello. And Councillor Ron Starr from Ward 6. Please say hello as well. I also have some staff here with us, some of our commissioners. Our City Manager, Janice Baker, is here with us. Welcome. Thank you. And Commissioners Gary Kent, Jeff Wright, and Ed Sajaki are all here with us. And I'd like to acknowledge that the CAO of the Region of Peel, David Schwark, is here with us today too. So we'll come to any questions on the Region of Peel over to you, David. All right. And of course, I want to recognize our dear friend, our city building partner, Minister Amarjeet Sohi, for joining us today. Thank you, Minister. In September, I joined Minister Sohi and Minister Shirelli, who we're still hopeful for, by the way. He has votes today, but maybe he'll join us a little later. And we joined each other in our nation's capital to take part in another federal, provincial, and territorial meeting of infrastructure ministers. Historically, these meetings have never featured municipalities, but cities are now asked to take part, and these discussions focused on Phase 2 of the Federal Infrastructure Fund. Mississauga stands to gain to receive up to $370 million over 10 years. Of course, that's depending upon how the program is rolled out, so we'll lobby the minister on that today. And this unprecedented investment will really help us lay the foundation to build up Mississauga over the next 50 years. Canada's municipalities are trusted partners in the Trudeau government and in the Wynne government as well. We have a seat at the table. Minister Shirelli, as I said, is still hopeful to join us. Mississauga is working closely as well with our partners at Metrolinx and the Wynne government to build the $1.4 billion Hurontario Light Rail Transit Plan, the single largest infrastructure investment in Mississauga's history. And this transformational infrastructure investment of this magnitude are really game changers for cities like Mississauga. They will be transformational indeed. I also want to recognize my friend, my good friend, my regional council colleague, and the mayor of Canada's 9th largest city, Mayor Linda Jeffrey, who is here with us today, and I know she has brought a team with her. You can recognize them later. I don't know if any of your councillors are here with you. No, okay. And together we work very closely with organizations like the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, AMO, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, the Large Urban Mayors Caucus, LUMCO, which Mayor Jeffrey chairs, and as well as the Big City Mayors of Canada. And we're all advocating for funding for our respective municipalities right across Canada. Mississauga certainly understands the importance of strong, reliable, and modern infrastructure. Infrastructure is fundamental to city building, but also to nation building. For instance, Mississauga's annual infrastructure deficit is now $240 million, despite a levy of 2% that we put aside each year to address our debt financing and our infrastructure. So we put 2% aside in the levy. It's important that we're able to build the projects already on our very rigorous 10-year asset management plan before we build out any new unplanned and unfunded infrastructure. Infrastructure policy, we feel, is also economic development policy. Mississauga is home, as you know, to 7 major highways, 3 major railways, Canada's largest airport, affectionately known as Mississauga International Airport. These local gateways connect businesses to consumers from around the world and help safeguard our economy. So as I bring my remarks to a close, I look forward to today's discussion, and I thank one and all for joining us today. Thank you.
Thanks, Your Worship. Before we kick off and I turn the microphone over to Andrew, I just want to invite our lead sponsor in the guise of the Greater Toronto Airports Authority, Hilary Marshall, to come up and say a few words at the very cool GTA end.
Also known as Mississauga International Airport. Good afternoon, Minister Sohi, Your Worships, and all elected officials. Thanks for joining us here today. I often call Peel the hard-working engine that makes our region work so well. The success of Peel means success for the region at large, and infrastructure, whether it's roads, transit, schools, hospitals, it's all key to our prosperity. And I'm sure our esteemed panel will have much more to say on this in a moment, because they're all real leaders on this front. Toronto Pearson is a great example of infrastructure that supports the prosperity of our region. We welcomed just over 44 million passengers last year, and by 2037 we expect to serve somewhere in the realm of 85 million passengers. Now, to support that growth, we're investing billions of dollars in infrastructure over the next 20 years, in addition to the more than $8 billion we've already spent in the last 20 years as we took over operation of Pearson. And we're investing in such key infrastructure projects as our regional transit center, which will help to connect the region, ease congestion, and support the movement of passengers, workers and goods within the airport employment zone, which incidentally is the second largest employment zone in the country. But the benefits of this transit center could extend well beyond the airport itself. It's going to connect a number of planned and existing transit lines and make it easier for tourists to explore Southern Ontario or tech workers to get from Waterloo to Mississauga and Brampton. It's going to tick a major box for companies looking to headquarter, like Amazon, and do business in a thriving metropolitan area with excellent transportation options. It's going to connect people in priority neighborhoods with jobs. And of course, this regional transit center will reduce greenhouse gas emissions and promote a healthier environment. So, I'm pleased to note we've received strong support from our elected officials to date, including as well as some of our key business partners at the Airport Corporate Centre, our boards of trades, federal government, and more. So Toronto Pearson is proud to be a partner in Southern Ontario's prosperity, and I thank all of our panelists for being leaders in driving investments in equitable prosperity in the region. So I'll turn it over to Pam.
Thank you, Hillary. Minister, Mayor, and Mayor, welcome. I've got a few questions for you. They're leading questions, and I figure there's no point in me asking you very tough questions because you'll answer the questions you want to answer, whether you like my answers, my questions or not. So let me just start with a fairly open one first with you, Minister. You're here in Mississauga and Brampton, is what we're talking about. You're the minister for the whole country. How do you set your priorities? What are your major priorities going forward?
Oh, first of all, thank you so much for hosting this gathering. This is the second Pearson Center sponsored event that I'm taking part in. The last one was in my home city of Edmonton. So thank you so much for doing this again. I also want to thank Hillary for sponsoring this event to your organization. People ask me, actually people were asking me when I was coming in that how often do I come to Mississauga, right? And I was telling them that almost every week because I change flights at the airport, right? So, you know, maybe once, sometimes more than once a week, right? So thank you for, also Michael, thank you so much for hosting this. I want to thank you both mayors for inviting me, and also thank you to all of you for being part of this discussion. When we got elected in 2015, our focus during the campaign and 2 years now with being in the government has always been, how do we build a stronger middle class? How do we provide opportunities for those who work hard each and every day to be part of that middle class? So whether it is reducing taxes on the middle class, whether it is the introduction of the Canada Child Benefit that is lifting almost 40% of Canadian children out of poverty, or extension of the CPP to make sure that when people retire, they have a decent income to retire on, or extension of the infrastructure programs that we are focused on. So all of that is focused on three outcomes that we generally talk about through infrastructure: economic growth and jobs for Canadians, building welcoming and inclusive places so people feel belong in the communities they live in, and environmental sustainability, moving toward more green economy and low carbon economy. So those are the kind of lenses that we apply when we make decisions as a government. So, and that's where the focus has been. I talked about some of the other stuff that we have done in infrastructure. Since taking office, my department has approved close to 4,000 projects in Canada, from coast to coast to coast, with a combined investment of $35 billion. And we have done that, and we are making progress. Vast majority of those projects are currently underway, creating jobs and making community life better for Canadians. We were able to do that because we shifted our thinking and really focused on partnerships. Partnerships with provinces and partnerships with municipalities particularly. You know, both mayors can tell you, and our former mayor can tell you, that the work that is being done in communities is so fundamental to people's quality of life. The roads that people drive on, the water people drink, and the recreational cultural facilities that people use on a daily basis. Without that, our country cannot function, our communities cannot function. So we cannot deliver on our commitments if we don't recognize the role that local governments play. And unfortunately in the past, the approach has been very top-heavy, Ottawa knowing the best, right? And we're shifting that. Our focus is that local leaders know more about the local needs than a minister sitting somewhere in Ottawa. And that is the reality. And we're shifting that, and we have shifted that. So we'll focus. So that has been a major change. It has not been a challenge, it's an opportunity. We see this as an opportunity where we can actually do more and build better infrastructure by relying on local knowledge. So I'm going to stop with that. I'm pretty sure we'll have many opportunities to talk about the overall broader plan that we have put in place.
So can you tell us a little bit about whether there was more news in the last, in terms of the economic statement from your colleague, the Minister of Finance last week, between that and other recent announcements, what are some of the new directions that you are beginning to lay down in terms of the actual funding you're going to do or the priorities that you have?
So two specific steps taken in the fiscal update by Mr. Morneau. One was to index the Canada Child Benefit, which is so important for building healthy families, because then people don't have to, families with young children don't have to make those choices where they have to make a decision whether to send their children for a field trip or buy them shoes or clothing. And those were the decisions that people were actually making because of tough economic situation. So that's one step. Another one is the introduction or expansion of the tax credit that low-income people will get now, because we want to make sure that there's incentive for people to work. What is happening that if someone is relying on social assistance and they are looking for work and they find work, then the benefits are clawed back, and that actually discourages people from getting back into the workforce. So we'll be changing that. We also reaffirmed our commitment to infrastructure. $180 billion will be invested over the next decade to support our municipalities and provinces to build better public transit systems so we can reduce commute time, so you can spend more time with your family. We are investing in water, wastewater infrastructure, so people have safe and clean water to drink, so parents don't have to worry about the safety of their children, whether they live in major urban centers or they're living in on the reserve for the conditions for the indigenous communities, or building recreational cultural infrastructure so people can live healthy lives, or investments into trade corridors that help us grow our economy and get our goods and services move more efficiently and more productive. We can make our economy more productive. So those are the steps we are taking, and we also were very aware of the challenges of each unique community. We don't want to have a cookie-cutter approach where what works for Mississauga may not work for Edmonton. We want to have a flexible approach, and we also want to make sure we provide the right support to the rural and northern communities.
Could I ask you to touch on the infrastructure bank a little bit? First, just tell us again why it's important in light of the discussion that took place when the bill was passed, because there was some degree of opposition to us, to the idea. So tell us a little bit about that, and also where it's at this point.
So infrastructure bank, or the creation or the need for the bank grew out of the realization and recognition that despite municipalities, provinces, and federal government making historic investments in infrastructure, there will still remain a large infrastructure deficit in our communities. So how do we fill that gap, and how do we mobilize private capital, pension funds, and institutional investors to work with the government to build that necessary infrastructure? So the role of the bank would be to look at projects that otherwise may never get built, or may have to wait 15, 20, or 30 years before they get built because either they're too large for public sector to undertake and very expensive for public sector to undertake, or they're too risky for private sector to undertake, because private sector, when they invest, they want to have a certain amount of certainty and return on the investment. So we feel that if we can create a mechanism through the Canada Infrastructure Bank for private sector to work with private sector, and then look at the possibilities and imagine projects such as the project that we talked earlier on about the transit hub, transportation hub at the Pearson Airport. No. I don't think you can build such a project just solely with public dollars or just solely with private dollars. You need partnerships. If you want to build high-speed train between Toronto and Ottawa, Montreal, Quebec City, that's billions and billions of dollars of investment that you would have to make. And governments don't have that kind of resources. So why would you not mobilize private capital to do that? Or if you want to build, transmission lines to connect, sustainable source of energy from one province to the other, why would you not look at mobilizing private capital in order to do that? So that's what we're hoping to do. Bank will be located in Toronto. We have appointed the chairperson. We are in the process of appointing the board and the selection of the CEO, and the bank will be up and running by the end of this year.
Thank you. I'd like to turn to the mayors, and maybe Mayor Jeffrey, I'll start with you first. Tell us a little bit about Brampton in terms of your priorities. I'm sure you've got a long list. How do you set your priorities? And there are so many.
So at the end of the day, it's probably in 3 different categories: transportation or transit. In our case, flood mitigation of our downtown, which will help us build the density around the transit. And the third would be some institutional buildings. In our case, we're looking at building Ryerson University in our downtown, and the last would be institutional, would be a hospital. You may have read a little bit about the challenges we're experiencing in Brampton. Certainly any high growth community is always struggling to catch up. And if I can say one thing that the federal government has done, which has really been a game changer for all of us who represent high growth communities, it's census data. That census data is really going to help us from a provincial perspective get the evidence we need to prove those funding formulas need to be tweaked, certainly provincially, in order to make sure you have the dollars in order to do those projects. Minister Sohi talked about the partnerships, and I've talked about this a number of times, even with my business community, how important it is to have federal, provincial partnerships to get a job done. And I have never, in all my years of politics, whether municipal or provincial, seen such an alignment of federal and provincial and municipal leaders talking about how they can do projects together. So in our case, certainly our conversation about transit, light rail transit, GO Transit, Rapid Express Rail, all of these institutions and projects are not sexy to talk about. They take a long time, they're a lot of money, and to have partnerships with the federal government is extremely important. And as Mayor Crombie spoke about, so I'll tell you, when I was a Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, I went up to talk to somebody in Ottawa about, not about releasing more money, but to just be able to access the money that had already improved. been approved, no one would meet with me. So the first time I go up as a mayor with big city mayors, we had, I think, 7 ministers the first meeting and the Prime Minister to sit down and listen to us, not actually talk at us about what our priorities were. So it is an extraordinarily different relationship, a very positive one that gives me great hope that the work that we're doing in our local municipalities to provide the evidence for those larger projects, that we actually have a partner at the table to help us with those.
And is it your sense that your 3 priorities align with the federal government's priorities?
Absolutely. We've had historic investment certainly in GO train transit throughout our regions. We've had the Prime Minister out. I think he's come to Brampton 3 times. Can't stay away. That's a good thing. And at the end of the day, those kind of priorities, and Mr. Sohi, I think he'd been on the job maybe a month, and I went to talk to him about our Riverwalk project, which is in our downtown, which will help us manage flood mitigation, but also find a way to build the density in our downtown around transit that we need and that is expected. He gave me an audience, was very interested, and we've begun the environmental assessment to begin that project. So very positive, very hopeful, and really helps us with the conversations we have with our provincial counterparts.
Thank you. Mayor Crombie, same question to you. What are the priorities for you? Giving us a...
Certainly. So just let me reiterate what Mayor Jeffrey said. This is a very special time. We've been calling it Renaissance, where you have 3 levels of government working collaboratively together, where we have unprecedented investments being made, billions of dollars being released on the federal level and the provincial level. Certainly we are blessed here in Ontario to have a very strong partner in Premier Wynne. So we're very, very fortunate that the stars, as Mayor Jeffrey has called them, stars are aligned right now. And it's very opportunistic time to be a mayor and to believe in investment in our cities to build up the 21st century cities. But therein lies the rub. So Mississauga, a city that is a young city, but still 44 years old, we need maintenance, but yes, we must invest to provide for the needs of our growing city. So we have those challenging and conflicting priorities of updating our infrastructure, maintaining it, yet building out new as well. So we are a city in demand. I think there's unprecedented development going on, at least there is from my perspective, but I'm sure former Mayor McCallion would argue 25 years ago we were building out the city, it was equally busy. But we are abuzz with development. And our theme as a council has been building out a complete city, a livable, walkable city. So of course our priority is building world-class infrastructure, but also building out public transportation, our transit systems and investing in those, ensuring that we have affordable housing so that our folks aren't priced out of the market, that our residents can continue to afford to live and work in our city and not have to move out, that our transportation networks are seamless, affordable, efficient, that we have an education system like Mayor Jeffrey talked about, her desire to attract the university, the Ryerson campus. We have UTM, we have Sheridan College's Business School. We're looking for another college or university on some of the development that is going on